No one forgets the first time they see real cruelty. Out here in the desert, some things burn deeper than the sun itself. Jack Carter thought he'd seen it all. He'd walked through gunfights that turned saloons into graves, watched men swing at sunrise, and stepped past bodies face down in the dust. But nothing prepared him for what he found that blistering afternoon outside Tombstone. She was there, tied tight to the trunk of a towering saguaro cactus, the kind that outlives men and watches death in silence. Her body slumped forward, skin already torn by the spines. Her dress was shredded, filthy, barely clinging to her frame. The bruises on her arms and legs looked like they'd been painted by the devil himself. Her head hung so low Jack thought she might already be gone. He reined his horse to a stop, dust curling around his boots as he swung down. For a moment, he just stood there, throat dry as sand. He'd seen rough justice before, drunks beaten to death, thieves stretched from ropes, but this wasn't justice. This was pure hate. The sun hammered down like a blacksmith's anvil, even under his hat. Jack squinted, eyes burning with disbelief. What kind of man could leave a young woman out here, baking alive beneath the desert sky? The longer he stared, the deeper it cut. The desert shows no mercy, and whoever left her here had even less. Then he heard it, a whisper, weak, cracked, almost stolen by the wind. He stepped closer, boots crunching on hard ground, heart pounding. Her lips moved, and when he leaned in, he caught 3 faint words. "Please help me." Those words hit harder than any bullet. They weren't just a plea. They were the last thread of life, clinging on in a world ready to crush her. Jack froze, rage and sorrow colliding in his chest. He didn't know her name. He didn't know what she'd been accused of. All he knew was that someone wanted her to suffer, and he was the only soul standing there to decide if she lived or died. His hands trembled as he reached for the rope. The knots were pulled cruel and tight, cutting into her skin. Each one looked tied by someone who wanted her gone from this earth. Jack yanked harder, jaw set, breath heavy. As the rope loosened, it revealed more bruises, more pain carved into her body. And then the truth hit him like a hammer. This wasn't punishment. This was execution. Standing there in the silence of the desert, Jack asked himself the same question any man with a conscience would have to face. Would you walk away, or would you stay and fight? He freed the last knot, and the rope slipped from her body. She sagged forward, and he caught her before she hit the dirt. Her skin burned from the sun. Her breath came ragged, her strength drained to nothing. Jack held her steady, one arm under her shoulders, wondering if she could even stand again. Her lips moved once more. This time he heard more than a plea. Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. But the words were clear enough to chill him. "I was cursed." Jack's jaw tightened. He'd heard that talk before. Folks quick to cry or curse when they feared what they didn't understand. It was the old way of blaming someone else for pain they couldn't explain. He glanced at her wrists, at the deep marks left by rope, and his stomach twisted. They hadn't just tied her here. They meant to erase her. She opened her eyes, glassy with tears, and for a heartbeat he saw the fight still left in her. This wasn't some spirit or devil. This was a young woman, flesh and blood, carrying superstition on her back like a cross. The bruises told one story, but her eyes told another. Hope. Fragile, flickering, but still alive. Jack steadied her against his chest, shading her face with the brim of his hat. He thought of the townsfolk, their angry voices, their narrow eyes. How quick men were to turn on the weak when fear ruled their hearts. He looked down at her and wondered what it said about justice in a place like this. She stirred again, her voice breaking. "They said my herbs were cursed. They called me dangerous." Jack felt anger rise hot in his chest. Which? That was their excuse. That was the lie. And it had been enough for them to leave her to die under the sun. He lifted her onto his saddle, his mind already burning with a single thought. If the town had branded her cursed once, how far would they go to silence her forever? Jack knew the desert had eyes. Word traveled fast in a small town. Faster still when fear and superstition carried it. By the time the stars rose over the black horizon, someone out there already knew he had taken her. Shadows moved along the trail behind him, faint and distant, but enough to keep his hand near his colt. The woman's head rested weakly against his chest as the horse picked its way through the moonlit scrub. Her breath came shallow, warm against his shirt, as though every rise and fall of her chest took more than she had to give. "You're safe now," Jack murmured, though he wasn't sure he believed it. He brought her to an abandoned line shack on the edge of his land, a place few men bothered with. He set her gently on an old bedroll, gave her water from his canteen, and watched her lips tremble as she drank. When her eyes finally closed, it wasn't peace that settled over him. It was worry. In the West, peace never lasted long. The sound came first, boots grinding against gravel. Then voices, low and sharp, riding the night air like rattlesnakes. "Carter," one called. "We know you got her. Hand her over." Jack stepped outside, the Colt heavy in his hand, the night air dry as bone in his throat. 3 men waited in the dark. He recognized them from the Tombstone Saloon, the kind of men who laugh harder when someone else cried. Not brave alone, but bold when they had numbers. Their eyes slid past him, searching for the girl inside like wolves sniffing for blood. "She's not going anywhere with you," Jack said, voice low and even. The tallest spat in the dust. "She's a witch, Carter. You're making a damn fool mistake." Jack's grip tightened. His mind flashed to her bruised wrists, to her cracked voice whispering the word witch. He thought of the ropes biting into her skin, the cactus needles tearing her dress, the sun cooking her alive while her neighbors called it justice. Something sharp rose in his chest, sharper than fear. The Colt came up in one smooth motion. The crack of the shot ripped through the desert air. The bullet punched clean through the brim of the tall man's hat, spinning it to the dirt. No one moved. The smell of gunpowder hung between them, harsh and bitter. Jack's voice stayed steady as a stone. "The next one doesn't miss." Their bravado drained faster than whiskey from a cracked bottle. Muttered curses, backward steps, boots scuffing on the gravel. They vanished into the shadows, leaving pride and dust behind. Jack watched them go, fingers still on the trigger. He knew they'd be back. This wasn't finished. Inside, the girl stirred in her sleep, whispering something he couldn't hear. Jack swore under his breath. The town wanted her gone, and when a whole town decides you're cursed, they don't stop until you're in the ground. By morning, Jack hadn't slept. He sat on a stool outside the shack, rifle across his knees, eyes on the desert as it turned from black to gray to blazing gold. The woman, he'd finally heard her name whispered in the night, Clara, still slept inside, breathing steady for the first time since he found her. Jack let out a slow breath, but peace in the West never lingers. He heard them before he saw them. The thud of hooves, the creak of saddles, the angry rumble of voices carried on the wind. Dust rose on the horizon, and then they came into view. A dozen, maybe more, men, women, even boys clutching sticks. Fear and anger had shaped them into a mob. Jack stood as they rode close, hand resting on his Colt. He knew bullets alone wouldn't hold back an entire town. The leader shouted first, "Carter, you know why we're here. Hand her over. She's cursed. She'll bring death to us all." Jack's jaw tightened. He thought of Clara's bruises, the way her voice cracked when she whispered witch. He raised his voice so they could all hear. "She's no danger to you. The only crime she's guilty of is being left to die by her own neighbors." The crowd roared back, some calling him a liar, others demanding rope and fire. Jack's hand hovered near his revolver. His heart thudded in his chest. He could take a few of them down, maybe enough to scatter the rest. But he knew if he drew, blood would stain the sand before noon. And then the crowd parted. A tall figure stepped forward, not in a gun belt, but in a black coat that marked him different. Reverend John Whitaker walked into the open, slow and steady, his sun-worn face calm, but his eyes holding a weight stronger than any bullet. He raised his hand, and the mob fell quiet. "You call her a witch," his deep voice carried. "You call her cursed. But I call her what she is, a child of God. Look at her. Look what you've done. If you spill more blood today, it won't be justice. It'll be sin." The silence that followed pressed on the air like stone. Some lowered their weapons. Some stared at the ground. Jack kept his breath even, watching every twitch of every hand. The Reverend's gaze swept over the crowd. Scripture says, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." Which of you can stand here today and say you are without sin? The word struck harder than any bullet. One by one, the mob cracked. A stick dropped. A gun lowered. A boy was pulled back by his mother. An older man at the rear lowered his rifle, shaking his head. No one stepped forward. No one cast a stone. The crowd thinned slowly, fury bleeding into uneasy silence. Jack's hand stayed close to his Colt until the last rider disappeared over the rise. The only sound left was the wind scraping over the desert floor. Inside the shack, Clara's faint voice called his name. He turned quickly, holstering the gun, and found her struggling to sit up. She was pale, lips cracked, but her eyes were clearer than the night before. "They're gone," Jack said softly, crouching beside her. For now, her gaze searched his face as though she was trying to read whether he spoke the truth. "They'll come back," she whispered. "Yeah," he admitted, brushing dust off his sleeve. "But I'll be ready." For a moment, she studied him like she couldn't figure out why a man like him would risk everything for a stranger. Jack avoided her eyes, busying himself with pouring water into a tin cup. He wasn't used to explaining himself. He just did what he thought was right, and damn the consequences. When Clara's trembling fingers closed around the cup, Jack steadied it for her. The way she drank, slow, cautious, like she feared there wouldn't be enough, told him more about what she'd been through than words ever could. "Why'd they do it?" Jack asked quietly. "They said my herbs were cursed," she murmured. "I treat folks when they're sick. Sometimes I help women when the doctors won't. That's all. But when fear comes, people stop listening." Jack clenched his jaw. He'd seen fear turn men mean before, but there was something uglier in this. They hadn't just wanted to scare her. They wanted her gone. "You're safe here," he said finally. "But we can't stay long. Word'll spread faster than a prairie fire." By afternoon, Clara had enough strength to stand. Jack saddled his horse, steadying her as if she were glass. When she swayed, he caught her with one arm, his face softening despite himself. "Easy now," he said. "We've got miles to cover." They rode west as the sun sank low, painting the desert gold. Every mile they put between themselves and Tombstone felt like a mile toward freedom, but Jack knew better than to think they were out of danger. The desert didn't forgive, and neither did small towns with long memories. When they reached Jack's small ranch near San Xavier Dell, Clara exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since the cactus. He led her inside, set her on a cot, and handed her bread and beans. Color crept back in her face with every bite. Evenings were quiet. She'd sit outside wrapped in a blanket, staring at the hills as the sun bled away. Jack would sit nearby, mending tack or sharpening a blade, one eye always on her. He didn't talk much, but he didn't need to. His care showed in silence, in the way he checked her water, the way he kept his rifle near the door. Clara noticed. One night, as stars spread thick across the black sky, she spoke. "You could have left me there." Jack didn't look up from the whetstone in his hands. "Didn't feel right. You risked your life for me," she pressed. He finally met her eyes. "You were tied to a cactus, Clara. That's not something a man just rides past." Something in her expression softened. She'd been called cursed, dangerous, even evil, but not once had anyone looked at her like Jack did, without judgment. Days passed. Clara grew stronger, but Jack's gut told him trouble wasn't far behind. Townsfolk don't forget what scares them, and fear doesn't forgive. One evening, as the desert wind cooled and coyotes cried in the distance, Clara's voice trembled. "They'll come again, won't they?" Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah, and next time they won't just talk." She looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Why help me, Jack? You don't even know me." He hesitated, setting the whetstone down. "Don't need to know you. I just know what's right." That night, while Clara slept inside, Jack sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, watching the moonlight slide over the hills. He thought of Mob's eyes, hard with hate. He thought of Reverend Whitaker standing between fear and reason, holding the line with nothing but words. And he wondered how long words could keep bullets at bay. Somewhere out there, Riders were already gathering. Jack could almost hear the hoofbeats in the distance, the sound of neighbors turning into hunters. Jack barely slept, though the desert night was quiet. He sat on the porch with his rifle balanced across his knees, eyes tracing every shadow that shifted under the moon. Inside, Clara murmured softly in her sleep, sometimes crying out words he couldn't quite catch. He wished he could ease those dreams, wished that keeping watch outside could keep the darkness out of her head as well as the men from town. By dawn, pale light washed over the ranch. Jack brewed coffee on the small stove, the smell cutting through the dry morning air. Clara appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, still weak but walking on her own. She sat carefully on the step and stared at him as he poured 2 tin cups full. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. Jack shook his head. Wasn't planning to. For a moment, neither spoke. They just sipped the bitter coffee, watching the desert turn gold. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "You're risking a lot for me." Jack met her eyes. "I've risked more for less reason." "Why?" Her voice carried more pain than curiosity. "You don't even know if I deserve saving." Jack set his cup down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I don't need to know. I saw what they did to you. That was enough." Clara looked away quickly, as though his words had cut through something she'd been holding tight. "People believe what they want to believe," she whispered. "When someone gets sick, when crops fail, they need someone to blame. I was easy." Jack's jaw tightened. He'd seen that kind of fear before. Seen neighbors turn on neighbors just because someone looked different, talked different, or knew too much about things they didn't understand. "Doesn't make it right," he said quietly. Clara glanced back at him, her eyes searching his face as if she wanted to believe him. "You don't think I'm cursed?" Jack let out a short, humorless laugh. "Only curse I see is folks too scared to mind their own business." For the first time since he'd found her, she smiled, faint, fleeting, but real. It made something in Jack's chest twist in a way he hadn't felt in years. By late morning, Jack saddled his horse to ride into town for supplies. Clara stepped out onto the porch, gripping the doorframe for balance. "Be careful," she said, her voice steady but her eyes wide. Jack tipped his hat. "Always am." But as he rode down the dusty trail, he knew it wasn't true. He'd never been careful a day in his life, and this time was no different. The streets of Tombstone were quieter than usual, folks eyeing him from windows and doorways. Word had spread fast, just as he'd feared. Inside the general store, conversation stopped when he walked in. The shopkeeper, Mr. Dugan, kept his voice low. "Jack, people are saying you're hiding her." Jack's face stayed calm. "People say a lot. You're stirring trouble with the wrong kind of men," Dugan warned, glancing toward the door. "They were in here this morning, asking questions." Jack gathered what he needed: flour, coffee, cartridges for his Colt, and paid without another word. He felt the weight of every stare on his back as he left town, the kind that follows you long after you've ridden out of sight. When he returned to the ranch, Clara was sitting outside again, watching the horizon with a faraway look. "They're talking about us, aren't they?" she asked before he even dismounted. "Let him talk," Jack said gruffly, unloading the supplies. "Talking's all they're good at." But they both knew it wasn't true. In towns like Tombstone, talk turned to action faster than dry grass to flame. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills, Jack saw movement on the ridge. Just a glint, maybe sunlight off metal. He stepped inside, calm but alert. Clara read his face instantly. "They're coming," she whispered. Jack didn't answer. He just checked his rifle, spun the cylinder on his Colt, and set them both within reach. The desert went quiet as night fell, the kind of quiet that warned of trouble riding in. Hours passed. Clara finally dozed off on the cot, though her breathing stayed shallow. Jack remained at the door, watching the moonlight slide across the ground. Then came the sound he'd been waiting for: hooves, slow and steady, in more than one set. Voices followed, muffled but close. "We know she's in there, Carter. This time, you're not stopping us." Jack stepped outside, rifle loose in his grip but ready. "Go home," he said evenly. "Ain't gonna be any killing here tonight." A harsh laugh answered him. "That's where you're wrong. She's coming with us. You hand her over. Maybe we let you live." Jack's eyes narrowed, the desert wind lifting his coat just enough to reveal the colt at his hip. "You try it," he said softly, "and see who's still breathing when the sun comes up." The silence that followed was thick, the kind that balanced on the edge of violence. The desert air was cold now, but sweat still ran down Jack's back as he faced the men in the dark. There were 4 of them this time, their horses shifting nervously in the dust. He could see their eyes glint in the moonlight, angry, certain, and scared all at once. "You don't have to do this," Jack said, his voice steady. "Go home. Forget this night." One man spat in the dirt. "Not while she's alive. You're standing with a witch, Carter." Jack's jaw tightened. "She's no witch. She's just a girl you all decided to hate because you're afraid." "Afraid?" the man sneered. "You ain't seen real fear yet." He nudged his horse forward, and Jack raised his rifle in one smooth motion. "Another step," Jack warned, "and you find out what real fear feels like." The night held its breath. Horses stomped the ground. Someone's saddle creaked. Clara stirred inside the shack and called Jack's name, weak but clear. "Stay down," Jack shouted over his shoulder. "Don't you move, Clara." The men heard her voice and smiled like coyotes catching a scent. "She's in there," one of them said. "Take him first, then the girl." Jack didn't wait. He fired a warning shot into the dirt between their horses. The sound cracked through the night like thunder. "The next one ain't a warning," Jack said flatly. "And I don't miss." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then the leader pulled his horse back. "This ain't over, Carter," he growled. "You can't fight the whole town." "Watch me," Jack said. They turned and rode off, dust trailing behind them until the night swallowed them whole. Jack stayed where he was, rifle steady, until he was sure they were gone. Only then did he lower it, breathing hard. His hands shook, not from fear but from the anger boiling inside him. Inside the shack, Clara sat up on the cot, her eyes wide. "Jack, what's gonna happen to us?" Jack knelt beside her and checked her bandages. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm not letting them take you." "You can't fight them all," she said softly. "I can damn well try." The next few days were quiet, almost too quiet. Clara got stronger. She started walking around the ranch, helping where she could. Jack tried to act like nothing was wrong, but every sound made his hand twitch toward his gun. One evening, as they sat by the small fire outside, Clara broke the silence. "Why are you really doing this?" Jack didn't answer right away. He watched the flames lick the dry wood, listened to the crackle and pop. "Because I've done a lot of things I ain't proud of," he said finally. "Letting them hurt you would have been one more." Clara looked at him closely. "You're a good man, Jack." He shook his head. "No, just a man who's tired of seeing the wrong people pay the price." Later that night, while Clara slept, Jack saddled his horse. He rode into Tombstone under the cover of darkness, keeping to the alleys and back streets. He needed to know what the town was planning. At the saloon, he overheard 2 men talking low over whiskey. "They'll go back for her soon," one said, this time with more men. "Carter won't stop 'em all." Jack's stomach turned cold. He finished his drink without being noticed, rode back fast, and stayed awake till dawn. When Clara stepped outside the shack, wrapped in her blanket, she saw the tired lines in Jack's face. "They're coming again," she said, reading his silence. "Yeah," Jack said simply, "and we need to be ready." He spent the morning fixing the ranch gate, making sure it would slow anyone down. He loaded both rifles and kept them by the door. Clara tried to help, but Jack told her to save her strength. That night, she sat by the fire, staring at him. "You can't do this alone." Jack looked up from cleaning his gun. "I'm not alone," he said. "You're here." Her eyes softened. "That's not what I meant." Jack didn't answer. He just checked the chamber, slid the gun into its holster, and listened to the wind outside. It was too still, too quiet, the kind of quiet that always came before trouble. The next day passed slow, every sound making Jack's heart pound a little harder. Clara tried to keep busy, sweeping the porch, folding blankets, anything to keep her hands from shaking. But she kept glancing at the horizon like she expected riders to appear at any moment. Jack sharpened his knife, fixed the saddle straps, checked his rifle twice. He tried to look calm, but Clara noticed the tension in his shoulders. "You ever think about just leaving?" she asked quietly. Jack looked up. "You mean running?" She nodded. "We could ride south. Find a town where no one knows us. Jack gave a small, tired smile. Wouldn't matter. Folks always carry their fear with them. You can't outrun it. Only thing to do is stand and face it. Clara lowered her eyes. You sound like someone who's done a lot of standing alone. Maybe I have. Jack put down the knife and sat beside her. But I ain't letting them take you. Not while I'm breathing. That night, the wind picked up. The ranch creaked in the dark, the boards shifting like old bones. Jack sat by the window with his rifle, eyes scanning the Black Hills. He'd been through gunfights before, but this felt different. This wasn't about pride or money. This was about protecting someone who couldn't fight back. It weighed heavier on him than any battle he'd ever fought. Around midnight, Clara came to the doorway, pale but steady. "Jack," she whispered, "you should rest. I'll keep watch." Jack shook his head. "No, you need your strength." She stepped closer. "Why are you doing this for me? You barely know me." Jack's eyes softened. "Because no one else would. And because what they did to you is wrong." Clara swallowed hard and nodded. "I won't forget it." The hours dragged on until just before dawn, when Jack heard them. Hooves again. More of them this time. The sound rolled across the desert like distant thunder. "Stay inside," Jack said quickly. He checked the rifles, made sure Clara had water and a way out the back if it came to that. Voices came through the dark, louder than before. A dozen men, maybe more, riding straight for the ranch. Jack stepped out onto the porch, rifle steady in his hands. "That's far enough," he called. The leader, a heavy-set man with a wide hat, stepped his horse forward. "Jack Carter, you've got no right to keep her. She's cursed, and if you won't do what's needed, we will." Jack's voice stayed even. "All she's guilty of is healing people you're too scared to understand. Go home." The man sneered. "We gave you a chance. Now we take her." He raised his hand, and a few rifles came up from the crowd behind him. Jack's heart hammered. He knew he couldn't shoot them all. If he fired, there'd be blood in the sand before sunrise. And then, just as the tension broke, a voice rang out over the crowd, strong, deep, cutting through the anger. "Hold it right there." Reverend Whitaker rode up from the east, his black coat flapping in the wind. He dismounted slowly, standing between Jack and the mob. "You're not killing anyone today," the Reverend said, his voice calm but carrying weight. "This isn't justice. It's murder." "She's dangerous, preacher," the leader growled. "If you're smart, you'll step aside." Whitaker shook his head. "I won't. You call her cursed, but I call her what she is, a child of God. Look at yourselves. Look at what fears turned you into." The crowd wavered. Some shifted in their saddles, uneasy. Clara peeked through the window, trembling, watching every moment. The Reverend raised his hand. "Scripture says, 'Let him who is without sin cast the first stone.' Which one of you here can claim that?" Silence followed, heavy as a storm cloud. One by one, rifles lowered. A boy at the back turned his horse around, and his mother followed. Another man dropped his rope into the dust. The anger drained from the crowd, leaving only shame and muttered words. Finally, even the leader backed his horse away. "This ain't done," he spat, but his voice held less fire now. The mob broke apart, riders scattering back toward town. Jack didn't lower his rifle until the last rider disappeared over the ridge. Only then did he exhale, long and hard, feeling the weight slide off his chest. At least for now. Inside, Clara rushed to him, her face pale but bright with relief. "You stopped them," she whispered. Jack shook his head. "The Reverend did. But they'll be back. Fear like that doesn't die easy." When the last rider vanished into the desert, the ranch fell quiet. Jack leaned his rifle against the porch post and sank onto the step. The cool air should have felt like relief, but it didn't. His heart still thudded hard, the kind of beat that takes a long time to calm. Clara stepped outside, bare feet brushing the wooden floor. She looked fragile still, but there was a new steadiness in her eyes. "You didn't have to do this for me," she said softly. Jack rubbed a hand over his face. "Yes, I did." "Why?" She pressed, kneeling beside him. "You don't even know who I am." Jack looked at her, really looked at her, not the bruises or the rope burns, but the woman beneath them. "I know enough," he said finally. "I know you didn't deserve what they did. That's all I need." Clara lowered her gaze, voice trembling. Most folks would have walked away. Most folks ain't me, Jack muttered. They sat in silence for a long while, watching dawn creep over the desert. The first rays of sun lit the hills gold, but it felt like a warning more than a blessing. Jack knew this quiet wouldn't last. The town's anger had only been pushed back, not erased. Later that day, Clara helped Jack patch a loose fence post. She worked slow but stubborn, refusing to sit still. "I'm not useless," she said when Jack tried to take the hammer from her hands. "Never said you were," Jack replied, though he hovered nearby in case she stumbled. She gave him a faint smile. "You're worse than an old nurse." Jack almost laughed, the sound rusty, like it had been years since he'd tried. He liked hearing her joke. It meant the fight in her was coming back. That evening, Clara cooked beans over the small stove while Jack sat at the table cleaning his colt. She glanced at him, her face serious again. "You can't stay here forever," she said. "They'll come again. Maybe with more men, maybe when you're not here." Jack nodded, wiping the barrel with a rag. "I know. You could let me go," she whispered. "If I'm not here, they won't bother you." Jack set the gun down and looked at her sharply. "You really think I'd hand you over to those bastards?" Her eyes shone with tears. She tried to blink away. "I just don't want you hurt because of me." Jack's voice softened. "Clara, I've been hurt before, but I couldn't live with myself if I left you to them." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then I guess I'm staying." The next few days brought an uneasy calm. Clara grew stronger, walking the ranch, sometimes humming softly to herself when she thought Jack wasn't listening. Jack kept busy, mending tack, hauling water, but his eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. One afternoon, Reverend Whitaker rode up the dusty trail. Jack met him at the gate, rifle resting easy but ready. "You've made some powerful enemies," the Reverend said gravely as he dismounted. Jack gave a humorless smile. "Wouldn't be the first time." "They won't stop," Whitaker warned. "Fear's a stubborn thing, and men who hide behind it are dangerous." "I know," Jack said, "but I'm not backing down." Whitaker's gaze softened. "I can't stay here to guard you both, but I can speak to the town. Maybe cool some heads." Jack nodded his thanks, though he didn't put much faith in words alone. Still, he respected the man for trying. That night, Clara sat on the porch steps with Jack, wrapped in a blanket. The stars stretched clear and endless above them. She glanced at him, her voice quiet but steady. "You ever think about starting over somewhere far from here?" Jack looked out at the dark hills. "Once. Long time ago. Didn't work out. Maybe it could now," she said, hope flickering in her voice. Jack shook his head. "Running don't fix what's wrong with people." He paused, then added, "But maybe once this is over, you should. You deserve better than this place." Clara studied his face in the starlight. "What about you? Don't you deserve better too?" Jack didn't answer right away. He just stared at the horizon like he could see trouble coming. And maybe he could. A faint dust cloud far off, too steady to be wind. "Riders again." His chest tightened. "Get inside," he said quietly. Clara followed his gaze and froze. "Jack!" "Now," he ordered. His voice left no room for argument. She went, but her wide eyes stayed on him until the door closed. Jack checked his rifle, loaded his Colt, and took a long breath. The desert night fell sharp, like it was holding its breath. They were coming again, and this time, Jack doubted words would be enough. The hoofbeats grew louder, steady, and sure. Jack stood at the edge of the porch, rifle in hand, eyes locked on the dark shapes approaching across the sand. There were fewer riders this time, 6, maybe 7, but their faces looked harder, more certain. These weren't men coming to scare him. These were men ready to kill. The leader, the same heavy-set man from before, pulled his horse to a stop a few yards out. "This ends tonight, Carter," he said, voice low and cold. "Hand her over." Jack stepped forward, rifle steady. "No, you can't fight all of us," the man growled. Jack's eyes narrowed. "Maybe not, but I'll make damn sure I take the first 2 with me." The men shifted in their saddles, guns low, fingers twitching near triggers. The night was so still Jack could hear Clara's breathing inside the shack, quick and shallow. He didn't turn to look at her, but he felt her fear pressing against his back. "Last chance," the leader warned. "Stand aside." Jack's voice was calm, almost quiet. No. The standoff felt endless. Just the wind, the creak of leather, the beat of horses' hearts in the dark. Then, unexpectedly, Clara stepped out onto the porch. "Clara, get back inside." Jack barked, but she didn't move. She stood tall, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, eyes blazing with something stronger than fear. "If you're going to kill me," she said to the men, "then do it while I'm standing. But look at me when you pull the trigger. Don't pretend you're doing this for God or for the town. Do it because you're cowards." The words hit harder than bullets. The riders hesitated, glancing at one another. Even in the dim light, Jack saw doubt flicker across their faces. The heavy-set man spat into the dust, but his voice had lost its edge. "She's dangerous. Everyone knows it." "No," Jack said sharply. "What's dangerous is fear. You're letting it make you cruel." For a long moment, no one spoke. The desert held its breath. Then one rider lowered his gun. "This ain't right," he muttered. He turned his horse and rode off. Another followed. Then another. The leader glared at Jack, but when he saw his men leaving, his shoulders slumped. "You'll regret this," he spat, before yanking his horse around and disappearing into the night. The silence that followed was deeper than before, almost peaceful. Jack lowered his rifle slowly, his hands shaking now that the danger had passed. Clara let out a trembling breath and leaned against the porch rail. "They're gone," she whispered. "For now," Jack said, "but I don't think they'll be back. Not after tonight." The next morning, Reverend Whitaker rode out again, his face tired but kind. "I spoke to the town," he told them. "Hearts are softening. Folks are ashamed. Sometimes fear burns hot, but it burns out quick when someone stands up to it." Jack glanced at Clara, who was finally standing straight, color back in her cheeks. "She's tougher than they know," Jack said quietly. "Maybe tougher than you know," Clara teased softly, and for the first time Jack smiled without forcing it. A few days later, Jack saddled his horse and watched Clara mount up behind him. They were leaving Tombstone for good, not running, just moving on. The desert stretched wide and empty, but the air felt lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. As they rode west, Clara looked at Jack. "Why did you really help me?" Jack kept his eyes on the horizon. "Because no one else would," he said, "and because a man ought to do the right thing, even when it's hard." Clara was quiet for a while, then whispered, "I'll never forget it." Jack tipped his hat against the sun. "Don't thank me. Just do the same for someone else someday." The desert wind carried their words away, but the lessons stayed behind. Cruelty lives where fear is left unchallenged, and mercy only grows when someone dares to stand up and fight for it. In the West, the sun burned hot and the land was harsh, but Jack Carter learned something stronger than both, that even a single act of courage could turn hate into shame and shame into change.